What if one small act of kindness cost you everything? A cashier helps an elderly man struggling to pay, only to be fired on the spot. But the next day, the truth is revealed. Her helpless customer was no ordinary man. And what happens next? No one saw it coming. The clock above the checkout lanes read 9:47 p.m. Bright Mart would close in 13 minutes. And the store had grown eerily quiet. The usual buzz of shopping carts and small talk had faded, replaced by the rhythmic beeping of the last transactions of the night. Anna stood behind register 4, her hands moving automatically as she scanned items for the remaining customers. A few last-minute shoppers wandered the aisles, grabbing things they had forgotten earlier. She adjusted her name tag absent-mindedly, smoothing out the crease in her uniform. It had been a long shift, like most nights, but she didn't mind. She liked her job. More than that, she liked the people, the ones who came through her line, sharing small moments of their day as she bagged their groceries. A soft shuffle of footsteps caught her attention. She looked up and saw an older man hesitantly approaching her register. His clothes were worn, his jacket slightly oversized, and he walked with a careful, deliberate pace. In his hands, he clutched a small shopping basket filled with a modest selection, a loaf of bread, a gallon of milk, and a dozen eggs. As he placed the items on the conveyor belt, Anna gave him a warm smile. "Good evening, sir. Did you find everything you needed?" The man nodded but didn't meet her eyes. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of crumpled bills. His fingers trembled slightly as he straightened them, carefully counting each one. Anna scanned the last item and glanced at the total. $18.42. The man's brow furrowed as he recounted his money. He was short. He hesitated, then gave a small, resigned sigh. His hand moved toward the carton of eggs, as if preparing to set it aside. Without thinking, Anna reached into her pocket. She pulled out a $5 bill, discreetly sliding it into the register before pressing the "cash tendered" button. "You're all set," she said, smiling as she bagged his groceries. The man blinked in surprise. He opened his mouth as if to protest, but she shook her head. "It's just a part of customer service," she said lightly. "You can pay it forward someday." For a moment, he simply studied her, his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite place. Gratitude, yes, but also something deeper, like he was memorizing this moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Thank you, young lady," he murmured, taking his bag. Anna watched as he turned and made his way toward the exit. But something about him lingered in her mind. He hadn't just been embarrassed, he had been watching her. A low whistle came from behind her. Jake, one of the night shift security guards, leaned against the counter with his arms crossed. He had seen everything. "You ever wonder if some of these people aren't who they seem?" he mused. Anna gave him a playful look. "What, like he's some kind of undercover millionaire?" Jake shrugged. "You never know. I've been working here long enough to say that people surprise you." She laughed, shaking her head. "He's just an old man trying to buy groceries." But when she glanced toward the entrance, she noticed something strange. The man hadn't left. He stood outside, just beyond the sliding glass doors, his silhouette barely visible against the dim parking lot lights. His posture was relaxed, hands tucked into his jacket pockets. But his gaze was directed back at the store, back at her. A chill ran down her spine. Before she could say anything, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Anna, office, now." She turned to see Mark, the store manager, standing a few feet away. His face was tight, his eyes cold. Jake muttered under his breath, stepping back as Anna set her scanner down. The store felt unusually silent as she followed Mark toward the office, her heart pounding just a little harder than before. She had no idea that this night would change everything. The office at Bright Mart felt colder than usual. The fluorescent lights overhead cast a sterile glow, washing out the dull gray walls. Framed charts displaying revenue targets and sales projections lined the room, a silent reminder of what mattered most in this place. The hum of the ceiling fan was the only sound as Mark took his seat behind the desk, his expression unreadable. Anna stood across from him, hands resting on the back of the chair in front of her. She didn't sit. Something about the way Mark had called her in made her uneasy. And she had no intention of making herself comfortable. Mark leaned back, crossed his arms, and let the silence stretch just long enough to make a point. Then, in a tone as flat as the spreadsheets on his desk, he spoke. Do you have any idea what you just did? Anna held his gaze. I helped a customer. Mark's lips pressed into a thin line. His fingers drummed against the desk before he pushed himself forward, elbows resting on the polished wood. You broke company policy, he corrected. Employees are not allowed to interfere with financial transactions. If a customer can't pay, they put something back. That's how it works. Anna exhaled slowly, steadying herself. She wasn't a stranger to Mark's rigid approach to rules. But this was excessive. It was $5, she said, her voice firm but calm. $5 that meant nothing to this company but made a difference to that man. Mark's eyes darkened. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the tile floor. Rules exist for a reason, he snapped. If we let employees start making their own decisions about who gets a handout, where does it stop? You think it's just $5 today? What happens when every cashier starts doing the same thing? Who decides when it's too much? Anna's fingers tightened around the chair. We're a billion-dollar corporation. Mark, $5 isn't going to bankrupt Bright Mart. But it might have meant that man didn't go hungry tonight. Mark's jaw clenched. He moved to his computer, typing rapidly before turning the screen toward her. The words on display were sharp. Final. Termination notice. Anna's breath caught in her throat. Mark folded his arms again. Effective immediately. You have 10 minutes to gather your things and leave. A dull roar filled Anna's ears. But she forced herself to stay composed. She had worked at this store for 3 years. She had never been late. Never had a complaint against her. Never taken a shortcut in her work. And now, over $5. It was all being erased. You're firing me, she said, more to herself than to him. Mark shrugged, his expression impassive. I need employees who follow the rules, not ones who think they're running a charity. A knot formed in Anna's stomach, but she refused to let the moment break her. If Mark expected her to beg or plead, he was about to be disappointed. She straightened her shoulders. One day, you'll realize kindness is worth more than a profit margin, she said quietly. For the first time, something flickered in Mark's eyes, an almost imperceptible reaction. But just as quickly, it was gone. Your 10 minutes start now, he said, dismissing her with a nod toward the door. As Anna stepped out of the office, the tension in the air spread. A small crowd had gathered near the customer service desk, drawn by the raised voices. Jake stood with his arms crossed, his expression tight. His gaze met hers, and though he didn't speak, the clench of his jaw said enough. He wasn't surprised, but he didn't like it. A woman in her 50s, one of the regular customers, shook her head in disapproval. All this because she helped someone? She muttered under her breath. Anna didn't stop to explain. She had nothing to defend. She walked past the registers, past the aisles she had memorized over years of work, past coworkers who either looked away awkwardly or gave her quiet, sympathetic nods. And then, as she reached the automatic doors, she nearly collided with someone. The old man from earlier. He looked up at her, the same thoughtful expression on his face. You did the right thing, he said, his voice steady. Anna hesitated, unsure of what to say. The way he said it, it was as if he already knew everything that had just happened. She gave him a small, appreciative nod before stepping out into the night air. The doors slid shut behind her, the finality of it sinking in. Inside, Mark returned to his office, shaking his head as he sat down. He had barely settled when his phone rang. A voice on the other end, sharp and direct. The CEO is visiting tomorrow. Make sure everything is in order. Mark smirked, leaning back in his chair. Perfect, he said. I'll show him how a store should be run. He had no idea who he was about to meet. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of freshly brewed coffee from the small kiosk near the entrance of Bright Mart. Inside, employees moved with hurried efficiency, restocking shelves, straightening displays, and ensuring everything was in perfect order. Mark stood near the front registers, arms crossed, watching his staff with satisfaction. Today was important. The CEO of the parent company was visiting. A man Mark had never met but had heard plenty about. It was the perfect opportunity to prove himself. especially after making the tough call to fire Anna. He had no regrets. She had broken protocol, and discipline had to be maintained. If anything, her departure was a demonstration of his ability to enforce company policy without hesitation. The store was running smoothly, exactly as it should. Outside, a sleek black sedan pulled into the lot, gliding to a stop in the designated VIP parking space. The driver stepped out first, walking briskly to open the rear door. Mark adjusted his tie, straightened his posture, and smiled as the CEO emerged. The older man stepped onto the pavement, his presence commanding in a way that was both subtle and undeniable. Unlike the previous night, there was no worn-out jacket, no hesitant movements. He was dressed in a tailored navy suit, polished leather shoes, and a crisp white shirt. His silver hair was neatly combed, his posture upright, his expression unreadable. Mark took a step forward, extending his hand. "Welcome to Bright Mart, sir. I'm Mark, the store manager. It's an honor to have you here." The CEO took in the surroundings first, his gaze sweeping over the store entrance, the employees, the customers moving in and out. Then, with deliberate slowness, he turned to Mark and shook his hand. "We'll talk later," he said simply. "For now, I'd like to take a look around." Something about the way he said it made Mark hesitate. There was no small talk, no pleasantries, just a quiet authority that left no room for argument. As they stepped inside, the energy of the store shifted. Employees straightened up, stealing glances at the CEO. Recognizing him now, a few exchanged nervous looks, whispering to one another. At first, Mark ignored it. They were probably just intimidated, which wasn't unusual when someone from corporate visited. But as they moved further in, he noticed something strange. The CEO wasn't just observing. He was studying. He lingered at the registers, his eyes scanning the checkout stations. When they reached the spot where Anna had worked, he stopped. His gaze flickered over the empty space for a moment before he turned to a nearby cashier. "The young woman who was working here last night," he said. "Where is she?" The question landed heavily in the air. The cashier, Michelle, a longtime employee, froze. Her hands gripped the edge of the counter as if steadying herself. She darted a glance toward Mark before lowering her voice. "She was let go," she said hesitantly. The CEO's expression didn't change, but his silence was sharp. He gave a small nod and continued walking. Mark felt a flicker of unease. They made their way to the back offices, where Mark had prepared a presentation, graphs, sales figures, policy compliance reports. He launched into his usual pitch, outlining the store's efficiency and profitability. But he barely got 3 sentences in before the CEO interrupted. "You fired a cashier for helping a customer?" Mark's throat tightened. The room suddenly felt smaller. "She violated company policy," he said, keeping his tone even. "If we allow employees to pay for customers out of their own pockets, it sets a precedent. It's about consistency. If one person does it, others will follow. And then who decides when it's too much?" The CEO remained silent for a long moment. Then, instead of responding, he smiled. But it wasn't the kind of smile that put people at ease. It was calculating. Mark's palms felt clammy. Something was off. He had dealt with executives before, people who wanted numbers, data, hard facts. But this man wasn't reacting the way Mark had expected. He wasn't just listening, he was evaluating, trying to push past his discomfort. Mark cleared his throat and continued his presentation, shifting topics to revenue projections. But now, doubt had started to creep in. The CEO had barely spoken, yet Mark could feel the shift in power. And then, as if the day wasn't unsettling enough, his phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out quickly, glancing at the screen. An unknown number. He hesitated before opening the message. "Be careful, he's not just here to inspect the store. He saw everything last night." Mark's stomach dropped. He looked up at the CEO, who was still listening, still watching. And for the first time that morning, a sliver of fear crept into Mark's mind. Mark shut the door to his office and exhaled sharply. His mind was racing, his heartbeat loud in his ears. The text message still glowed on his phone screen. Someone knew. Someone had seen what happened last night. He paced behind his desk, trying to calm himself. There was no need to panic. The CEO might suspect something, but without concrete proof. It was just speculation. He needed to get ahead of this, erase any trace of the incident before it spiraled out of control. Sitting down, he pulled up the store's employee records. The termination email he had sent regarding Anna was still in the system. With a few quick clicks, he deleted it, gone, as if it never happened. Next, he grabbed his phone and dialed I need a favor, he said, keeping his voice even. There was a mistake in the system. A former employee, Anna, was terminated last night, but that record needs to be removed. No need for it to show up anywhere official. A brief silence on the other end. Then a cautious response. That's highly unusual, Mark. Terminations are logged for legal reasons. It was an error, Mark insisted. Just make sure no one mentions her name to corporate. Keep it off the books. After a pause, the HR representative sighed. I'll see what I can do. Mark hung up. That was step 2. For the final piece, he needed to ensure his staff kept their mouths shut. He stepped out of his office, spotting a small group of employees talking near the break room. Their voices hushed as soon as they saw him. You all have work to do, he said flatly, and I don't want to hear another word about last night. Understand? The employees exchanged wary glances but nodded. Mark felt a surge of relief. If he kept control of the narrative, he could survive this. Then he heard the CEO's voice. Pull up last night's security footage. His stomach dropped. From the other side of the store, Mark saw the CEO standing with the IT technician. Arms crossed. The employee hesitated before nodding and turning to the computer screen. Mark moved quickly, closing the distance between them. That won't be necessary, he said, forcing a smile. I can personally assure you everything has been running efficiently. The CEO raised a hand, silencing him. The video began to play. There was no denying what the footage showed. Anna, handing over $5 to an elderly man. Mark, storming toward her, his voice raised. The way she stood her ground. The brief flicker of disbelief on her face when he fired her on the spot. The silence in the room was suffocating. The CEO finally spoke, his voice low and firm. Do you want to explain this? Mark swallowed hard. His mind scrambled for an answer. Something that would justify what had just played out on the screen. Sir, he started, this was a necessary decision. If we allow employees to start covering for customers, where do we draw the line? We have policies in place for a reason. If we make exceptions, the system falls apart. The CEO tilted his head slightly, as if weighing his words. So, you believe maintaining rigid policy is more important than rewarding employees for showing basic human decency? Mark felt a bead of sweat roll down his temple. It's about consistency, he argued. We can't let emotions interfere with business. The CEO didn't reply right away. He let the words settle in the room, studying Mark the way a seasoned hunter sizes up his prey. Then, with slow precision, he reached into the folder he had been carrying and placed it on the desk. Mark's throat went dry. Do you even know who that customer was? The CEO asked. Mark didn't answer. He couldn't. The CEO flipped open the folder. Inside was a document, one that bore his own name, followed by a title Mark had failed to notice on his arrival. Chairman and CEO, Bright Mart Corporation. The old man, the same one Mark had dismissed so easily. A sickening realization washed over him, draining the color from his face. The CEO let the silence drag before reaching for his phone. Without breaking eye contact, he dialed a number and spoke a single sentence. Prepare the termination paperwork for Mark immediately. Mark felt the floor tilt beneath him. His legs locked. His breath caught in his throat. This couldn't be happening. The CEO turned to the employees nearby, his expression unreadable. This store needs a manager who understands integrity. His gaze swept across the room before he pulled his phone out once more. Get me Anna, he said. Mark barely heard the words. He was still frozen, staring at the screen where the security footage replayed on loop. Everything he had worked for, undone in a matter of minutes. A quiet hum filled the small cafe as Anna stared at the job postings on her laptop screen. The smell of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air, mingling with the faint sound of conversations from the few early morning customers. She had been at this for hours. scrolling through listing after listing, trying to find something that didn't make her stomach twist. Nothing felt right. She wasn't ready to work somewhere new. Not yet. Her coffee had long gone cold when her phone vibrated against the wooden table. A number she didn't recognize flashed on the screen. For a moment, she considered ignoring it. Then, against her better judgment, she picked up. A deep, steady voice filled her ear. "Good morning, Anna. My name is Richard Sterling. I'm the CEO of Bright Mart." She sat up a little straighter, gripping the phone tighter. "I was hoping we could meet," he continued. "There's something I'd like to discuss with you." Her mind spun. She hesitated, but there was something about his tone, calm, certain, as if he already knew she would say yes. "All right," she said finally. "Where?" The hotel was nothing like the fluorescent-lit aisles of Bright Mart. The private meeting room, tucked away on the top floor, was quiet, bathed in natural light from the floor to ceiling windows. The city stretched beyond the glass, distant and untouchable. Anna stepped inside, her heart pounding. And there he was, the old man she had helped just a night ago, now seated in a perfectly tailored suit, exuding quiet authority. He didn't look surprised to see her. If anything, he looked like a man who had expected this moment. Richard Sterling stood and gestured toward the chair across from him. "Please," he said, "have a seat." Anna lowered herself carefully, her nerves tightening. She had never met anyone like him before, someone who could command a room without raising his voice. "You must have a lot of questions," Richard said, watching her closely. "But first, I owe you a thank you." Anna blinked. "For what?" "For reminding me why I started this company in the first place," he said simply. It was never just about numbers. It was about people. She wasn't sure what to say to that. Richard leaned back, studying her for a moment before reaching into the folder beside him. "Bright Mart needs a new store manager," he said, placing a document between them. "And I want that person to be you." The words didn't register at first. Anna stared at him, waiting for the joke, the catch, anything to make sense of what she had just heard. "You want me to run the store?" she asked slowly. Richard nodded. "You care about the people who walk through those doors. That's what matters most in a leader." A strange mix of emotions swirled in her chest. She had been ready to walk away from Bright Mart forever, to forget the unfairness of what had happened. And yet, here was the man at the top, offering her the very position Mark had used against her. She felt an undeniable satisfaction knowing Mark had been fired. But stepping into his role? Doubt crept in. "I don't know if I'm the right person for this," she admitted. "I've never managed anything before." Richard didn't look concerned. "You understand people. You understand fairness. Everything else can be taught." She swallowed, torn between the weight of the offer and the voice in her head whispering that people wouldn't accept her. The same employees who had watched her leave last night, how would they react to seeing her return as their boss? Richard seemed to sense her hesitation. "I'll give you the day to think about it," he said, rising to his feet. "But I believe you already know the answer." Anna left the hotel feeling like the ground beneath her had shifted. The city moved around her as if nothing had changed. But everything felt different. Her thoughts tangled, looping back to the same question. Could she do this? Her phone buzzed again as she reached her apartment. A new message. No name. Just words. "Be careful. Not everyone wants you back at Bright Mart." Word spread through Bright Mart faster than anyone expected. By mid-afternoon, nearly everyone in the store had heard two things. Mark was gone, and Anna might be coming back as their new manager. The reactions were mixed. Some employees, especially those who had witnessed what happened the night Anna was fired, saw it as a win for fairness. Michelle, the longtime cashier, nodded approvingly when she heard the news. Jake, the night security guard, smirked to himself, shaking his head as if to say, "About time." But not everyone felt the same. Others muttered among themselves, exchanging skeptical glances. A few whispered about how Anna had never managed a store before. How just a few days ago, she was one of them, scanning barcodes at a register. Nathan stood near the break room doorway, listening. He had worked under Mark for 2 years, watching and learning, always assuming that when Mark eventually moved up, he'd take over. But now, some former cashier was about to steal what should have been his. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay calm. This wasn't over. Mark sat alone in a dimly lit bar. A half-empty glass in front of him. The glow from the television above the counter flickered against the bottles lining the shelves, casting shadows across his face. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, staring at it but not really seeing it. He hadn't touched his phone in hours. There was no point. No one from corporate was going to call. No one was going to fix this. The sound of someone sliding onto the stool next to him pulled him from his thoughts. He glanced over. Nathan. Mark let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. If you're here to gloat, don't bother. Nathan signaled the bartender for a drink. Actually, he said, his voice smooth, calculated, I thought you'd be interested in knowing who's taking your spot. Mark didn't need to ask. He already knew. Still, hearing it out loud made something burn in his chest. Nathan smirked. Anna. Mark exhaled through his nose, gripping his glass tighter. She won't last a week, he muttered. Nathan raised an eyebrow. No, he agreed, lifting his drink to his lips. She won't. Anna sat on her couch, staring at her phone. She had spent hours replaying Richard's offer in her head, trying to imagine herself in that role, managing schedules, overseeing sales, handling employee disputes. It wasn't just about running a store. It was about proving she belonged in a position she never expected. But more than that, it was about proving that the right thing had consequences, that standing up for people mattered. She inhaled deeply, pressed the call button, and waited. Richard answered on the second ring. I'll do it, she said. There was a pause, then a small chuckle. Good, he said. I'll see you in the morning. Elsewhere, in the glow of a street lamp, Nathan stood with his phone in hand, typing. His message was short, simple. Get ready, tomorrow. She learns the hard way. He hit send, watching the screen for a moment before slipping the phone back into his pocket. Then he smiled. Anna stepped through the automatic doors of Bright Mart, her heart pounding harder than she cared to admit. The store looked the same as it had the last time she was here, rows of neatly stacked shelves, the hum of shopping carts rolling over polished floors, the faint murmur of morning customers. But everything felt different. She wasn't just another cashier anymore. She was the new store manager. Employees had gathered near the registers, some pretending to restock shelves, others openly watching as she walked in. A few familiar faces greeted her with cautious smiles. Michelle gave her a small nod from behind the customer service desk, and Jake lifted a hand in a silent salute from his post near the entrance. But not everyone was welcoming. Anna could hear the murmurs, the hushed voices barely concealed behind aisles and counters. She was a cashier last week. Now she's our boss? Richard Sterling must really like her. She won't last a month. And then there was Nathan. He stood near the break room entrance, arms crossed, eyes sharp and unreadable. He didn't say anything, didn't move, just watched. Anna forced herself to keep walking. She wasn't here to convince everyone to like her. She was here to do the job. The office felt colder than she remembered. She had barely taken a step inside when a thick stack of papers landed on the desk in front of her. Anna looked up. Nathan stood there, his expression neutral but his tone dripping with forced politeness. Welcome back, he said. I figured you'd want to get started right away. Here's everything Mark left behind. Inventory discrepancies, schedule changes, vendor complaints, a real mess. Hope you're up for it. Anna glanced at the stack. It was overwhelming, sure, but she had expected this. She picked up the first folder and flipped it open. Thanks, she said, her voice steady. I'll get through it. Nathan's smirk faltered just a little, as if he had been hoping for a different reaction. Take your time, he said before turning away. Wouldn't want you to get overwhelmed. In the break room, Nathan leaned against the counter, speaking in low tones to a small group of employees, ones who had been loyal to Mark. This store is already running fine, he said. We don't need some hand-picked favorite messing things up. A few of them nodded. So we just, what? Make things difficult for her? One of them asked. Nathan smiled. We don't have to do much. Let's just say, a few mistakes here and there will make it clear she's not cut out for this. One employee shifted uncomfortably. I don't know. She doesn't seem so bad. Nathan's eyes darkened. That's not the point. She doesn't belong in that office. And we all know it. Anna was halfway through a scheduling report when the door burst open. A young employee, Sam, from the front end, stood there, out of breath. "We've got a problem," he said, his voice rushed. "Big one." Anna set the report down. "What is it?" "The registers. Something's wrong with the system, customers can't pay. And there's a huge line forming. People are getting mad." For a brief second, Anna's mind flashed back to when she was the one standing behind those registers, trying to stay calm when the machines acted up. Only this time, she was the one expected to fix it. She pushed her chair back. "Let's go." She had been waiting for her first real test. And now, it had arrived. Anna's footsteps were quick but steady as she followed Sam toward the front of the store. She could already hear it, the growing frustration of customers, the tense murmurs of employees, the steady hum of a problem spiraling out of control. The moment she rounded the corner, she saw the chaos unfold. A long line stretched from the checkout counters, customers shifting impatiently, some checking their watches, others whispering among themselves. A few had their arms crossed, eyes flicking toward the registers where cashiers fumbled with card readers that refused to process payments. At the front of one line, a middle-aged woman sighed loudly, shaking her head. "I've been standing here for 20 minutes, she said, voice edged with irritation. "How does a place this big not have a backup system?" Behind her, a man with a full cart let out a frustrated exhale. "This is ridiculous. What are we supposed to do? Just leave our groceries here?" Anna didn't hesitate. She turned to Sam. "Get me a status update from IT. Now." Sam nodded and hurried off. Then, she took a deep breath, stepped forward, and raised her voice just enough to be heard over the murmuring crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I understand this is frustrating," she said, scanning the faces of customers. "We're working on a fix. And in the meantime, we have an alternative. If you're paying with cash, we can process your purchases right now. If you're using a card, we can manually log your order and process payment once the system is back online. Either way, we'll get you out of here as quickly as possible." There were still some grumbles, but the immediate tension in the air shifted. A few customers nodded, others visibly relaxed. Anna turned to the nearest cashier, Michelle, who had been trying her best to keep customers calm. "Set up a manual log for each transaction," Anna said. "Write down totals, take cash when possible, and make sure customers get receipts. If they're paying with a card, have them sign off on the amount so we can charge them once we're back up." Michelle nodded, already pulling out a notepad. Jake, the security guard, stepped up beside Anna. "Smart move," he muttered. "Buying yourself time." "Not just time," she said. "A solution." From the back of the store, Nathan watched. His fingers tapped idly against a shelf of canned goods as he observed the scene. His expression unreadable. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. He had expected panic, expected Anna to freeze up under pressure. Instead, she was handling it, and worse, people were listening to her. He exhaled sharply, turning away. "Fine," he muttered to himself. "Let's see how she handles the next one." 30 minutes later, Sam rushed back, slightly out of breath. "IT says it wasn't a system glitch," he said. "Someone deliberately tampered with the payment processing software." Anna's stomach tightened. "How?" "They don't know yet," Sam admitted, "but the system was manually overridden. Someone inside did this." Anna's first thought was Nathan. It made sense. He had motive, and he had access, but without proof, she couldn't accuse him outright. Still, she knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just a technical problem. It was a message. By the time the store closed for the night, the system had been restored, and most customers had left without further complaint. Anna sat in her office, exhausted but relieved. They had made it through the day. Her phone buzzed. She reached for it absently, expecting a message from Richard or IT with a final report. But when she looked at the screen, her breath caught. Unknown number. Today was just the beginning. You won't last long. She stared at the words, a slow, cold realization creeping into her chest. Someone wanted her gone, and they weren't done yet. Anna sat in her office, staring at the screen in front of her. The numbers blurred together, but she wasn't really reading them. Her mind kept circling back to the same question. Who was trying to sabotage her? The payment system crash hadn't been a coincidence. IT had confirmed it was a manual override, meaning someone inside the store had deliberately caused it. Someone with access. Someone who knew exactly how to create chaos on her first day. Nathan was the obvious suspect. He had made his resentment clear. And Mark had left behind a small group of loyal employees, most of whom saw Anna as an outsider who didn't deserve the position. But suspicion wasn't enough. If she accused the wrong person, she'd only make things worse. She needed proof. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before she pulled up the system logs. The IT team had reset everything after the crash. But if someone had tampered with the system, there had to be a record somewhere. She scanned the access history, checking timestamps, looking for anything unusual. Nothing. Frustrated, she leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temple. Whoever had done this had covered their tracks well. A soft knock at the door made her sit up. Kevin, one of the IT specialists, stood hesitantly in the doorway. He glanced over his shoulder before stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "I found something," he said quietly. Anna straightened. "What is it?" Kevin hesitated, then pulled a USB drive from his pocket and handed it to her. There was an unauthorized login right before the system crashed. He explained. Someone accessed the payment software from an internal account. But the log was wiped almost immediately after. Anna turned the USB drive over in her palm. "Can we recover the deleted data?" Kevin frowned. "I got some of it back. But not enough to identify who did it. Just enough to prove it wasn't a system error." Anna clenched her jaw. It wasn't just paranoia. Someone really was trying to take her down. Nathan stood near the break room, speaking in low tones to a group of employees. "She's not ready for this job," he said, shaking his head. "Look at what happened yesterday. A total disaster." A few employees nodded in agreement. "She's trying, though," one of them muttered. "At least she didn't freak out." Nathan scoffed. "Trying isn't enough. This store needs a real leader, someone who actually knows what they're doing. Not a cashier who got lucky." There were murmurs of agreement this time. Nathan smiled to himself. The more doubt he planted, the easier it would be to push her out. Later that afternoon, Anna walked into the staff meeting feeling the weight of every glance that followed her. Nathan sat near the back, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The meeting started normally, updates on store policies, inventory checks, but it didn't take long for the tension to surface. "Let's talk about yesterday," Nathan said suddenly, leaning forward. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "That was one of the worst system failures we've had in years. Customers were angry, lines were backed up, and we lost sales. Not exactly a strong first day." Anna met his gaze evenly. "And we handled it. Customers got their purchases. The system was restored, and we moved forward." Nathan shrugged. "Still, it raises a question. This store needs a manager who knows what they're doing. Someone with experience." He let the words hang in the air. A few employees exchanged glances. Anna kept her expression neutral. "Are you saying I don't belong here, Nathan?" Nathan held up his hands. "I'm just saying some of us have been here a long time. We know how things work. Change isn't always a good thing." Anna's pulse quickened, but she refused to take the bait. Change is necessary when something isn't working. Nathan smirked. "Well, let's hope you don't break anything else while you figure that out." The tension in the room was thick. Anna knew she had to pick her battles. And this wasn't the time to go after Nathan directly. Not yet. That night, after the store had closed, Anna checked her email one last time before heading home. A new message sat in her inbox. No sender name, no subject. She clicked it open. "If you want to keep this job, you should leave before it's too late." Her fingers tightened around the mouse. Whoever was behind this wasn't done yet. Nathan had been patient. He had watched, waited, and tested Anna's ability to adapt. The payment system failure hadn't been enough to shake her. She had handled it too well. This time, he needed something bigger, something she couldn't fix with a quick speech or a temporary workaround. And that's when the idea struck. Inventory loss. It was simple, effective, and, most importantly, difficult to trace if done correctly. Late that evening, after most of the staff had left, Nathan pulled aside one of Mark's former loyalists, Kyle, a stockroom employee who had never quite warmed up to Anna's leadership. "We need to adjust some numbers," Nathan said casually, leaning against a stack of shipping boxes. "Just a little miscalculation in the system." No real harm. Kyle frowned. What exactly are we talking about? Nathan smirked. A few $1,000s in missing merchandise. Enough to make corporate raise an eyebrow. Enough to make them question whether Anna knows what she's doing. Kyle hesitated, but Nathan clapped him on the shoulder. Relax. You won't have to do anything but follow instructions. Just log these items as missing. And I'll take care of the rest. Kyle nodded slowly, not entirely convinced but not willing to argue. The next morning, Anna sat at her desk, sipping her first coffee of the day, when an email from corporate landed in her inbox. She clicked it open, her stomach dropping as she read the subject line. Urgent. Inventory discrepancy, immediate response required. The email detailed a significant loss of merchandise, thousands of dollars worth of products that, according to system records, had gone missing under her watch. Corporate was demanding a full explanation. Anna blinked, rereading the email. This had to be a mistake. She pulled up the inventory logs. The numbers didn't lie. Large shipments had been marked as missing. The digital records all pointed to her as the one responsible for the oversight. She exhaled slowly, forcing herself to stay calm. She hadn't made this mistake. Someone had set her up. And she had a pretty good idea who. Nathan appeared in her doorway not long after. Tough morning? He asked, voice dripping with fake concern. Anna didn't look up from her screen. What do you want, Nathan? He stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. I heard about the incident. Not a great look, especially so soon after you took over. Anna finally met his gaze. Is there a reason you're here? Or are you just enjoying yourself? Nathan shrugged. I hate to see you struggle. And, you know, corporate doesn't take kindly to this kind of thing. Losing thousands of dollars in inventory? That's the kind of mistake people get fired for. Anna leaned back in her chair. And let me guess, you'd be more than happy to take over if that happens. Nathan gave her an innocent smile. I'm just saying, if you need help, I could talk to the right people. Smooth things over. Anna studied him carefully. She knew exactly what this was. He was playing the long game, pretending to offer a lifeline while tightening the noose. Appreciate the offer, she said, voice level, but I'll figure this out. Nathan's smile faded just a little. He had expected her to panic, to break, but she was still standing. Meanwhile, Kevin had been working behind the scenes. The IT specialist had been suspicious ever since the payment system failure. Now, with the sudden inventory loss, he was convinced someone was sabotaging Anna. Digging into the system records, he traced the changes made to the inventory logs. Whoever had altered the data had done a good job covering their tracks. But not good enough. Kevin managed to recover partial access logs. And there it was. An account linked to Nathan had been used shortly before the discrepancy appeared. He had proof. He grabbed his phone, ready to call Anna. As Kevin stepped into the parking lot after his shift, he barely noticed the man leaning against a car near the exit. Until the man spoke, you might want to stop digging. Kevin froze. The man, tall, broad-shouldered, with a casual stance that didn't match the sharpness in his eyes, took a slow step forward. People who know too much, he said, his voice calm, almost friendly, tend to have problems. Kevin's heart pounded. The man patted him lightly on the shoulder before walking away. Kevin swallowed hard, gripping his phone tighter. Someone wasn't just covering Nathan's tracks. They were protecting him. Anna sat at her desk, staring at the email from corporate. 48 hours. That was all the time she had to explain the missing inventory before they considered suspending her. She exhaled slowly, tapping her fingers against the desk. This wasn't just an administrative headache, this was a deliberate attack. Someone was trying to push her out, and the moment she failed to provide an explanation, corporate would have the excuse they needed to replace her. She didn't have to guess who was behind it. Outside her office, Nathan was in his usual spot, leaning casually against the breakroom door. His arms were crossed, his expression unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, amusement, anticipation. He was waiting for her to fail, and that wasn't going to happen. Anna needed evidence. And she needed it fast. She grabbed her phone and typed out a quick message to Kevin. Can we meet? I need your help. There was no immediate reply. She waited, glancing at the clock. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Finally, her phone vibrated. Kevin. After work. Not at the store. Too risky. A few hours later, they met at a small diner a few blocks away. The place was nearly empty. Just a few regulars nursing their coffee. Kevin looked around nervously before sliding into the booth across from her. "You sure this is a good idea?" he muttered, voice low. Anna nodded. "I don't have a choice. If I can't prove this wasn't my mistake, I'm done." Kevin hesitated. "I did some digging," he said finally. "Whoever tampered with the inventory logs knew what they were doing. Most of the traces were wiped clean." "But," Anna leaned in. "But what?" Kevin exhaled. "I managed to restore part of the access history. The changes were made using an internal account. One that's linked to Nathan." Anna's jaw tightened. "That's enough to prove he's involved." Kevin shook his head. "Not quite. The account was used through a remote login, which means Nathan can claim someone else used his credentials. It's not enough to pin this on him directly." Anna sat back, frustration bubbling in her chest. She was so close, but not close enough. "I need more," she murmured. "Something solid." The next morning, Anna arrived at work to find Nathan waiting for her near the front entrance. "Rough couple of days, huh?" he said, his tone sympathetic, but the smirk on his face told a different story. She didn't respond. Nathan tilted his head. "You know, you don't have to go through this alone. If you ever need someone to vouch for you, well, I do have a bit of influence around here." Anna finally looked at him. "Let me guess," she said. "In exchange for what?" Nathan gave an exaggerated shrug. "Oh, nothing much. Maybe just reconsidering if this is the right job for you." She let the words hang between them, then smiled, not out of amusement, but out of understanding. She had just confirmed what she already knew. Nathan wasn't just waiting for her to fail. He was making sure she did. That night, as Anna was locking up her office, her phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize. She hesitated before answering. A woman's voice came through. Quiet but firm. "We need to talk." Anna frowned. "Who is this?" "My name's Sarah," the woman replied. "I used to work for Mark. And I have something you're going to want to see." Anna's grip on her phone tightened. "But first," Sarah continued, lowering her voice, "I need to know that if I help you, you can keep me safe." Anna's pulse quickened. She had no idea what Sarah had. But one thing was clear. Nathan wasn't the only one keeping secrets. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she slid the small USB drive across the table. Anna picked it up, feeling the weight of something far heavier than plastic and metal. Inside was everything she needed. The emails between Mark and Nathan were damning, proof that Mark had instructed Nathan to continue sabotaging the store even after his firing. There were detailed messages about how to manipulate the system, alter inventory records, and manufacture a crisis that could be pinned on Anna. And Nathan had followed the plan perfectly. Anna exhaled, gripping the USB tightly. This wasn't just office politics anymore. This was deliberate fraud, and if she handled this right, it would end today. The next morning, Anna walked into the meeting room with measured steps. Seated at the long conference table was the regional director of Bright Mart, Mr. Alan Whitmore, a man known for his no-nonsense approach to management. Across from him sat Nathan, his usual smug expression replaced with something colder, more calculating. Anna placed the USB on the table. "I'd like to present evidence proving that the recent inventory discrepancy wasn't due to mismanagement," she said, voice steady. Whitmore gestured for her to continue. She clicked the remote, and the screen at the front of the room lit up with copies of the emails. These messages confirmed that Mark instructed Nathan to manipulate inventory records. Nathan used a fake account to alter the data, making it appear as if I was responsible for the missing stock. Nathan leaned back in his chair, but Anna noticed the slight twitch of his fingers. He hadn't expected this. Next, she handed Whitmore a file compiled by Kevin. This report shows system access logs recovered from the IT department. Anna continued. It proves that the changes to the inventory system came from a device Nathan had access to. A quiet murmur filled the room. Some of the other employees present shifted uncomfortably, clearly realizing the depth of the deception. Anna turned her gaze to Nathan. "Do you have anything to say?" Nathan's expression remained neutral, but his grip on the table tightened. And then, instead of denying it, he smiled. "That's impressive," Nathan admitted, leaning forward. You did your homework. He reached into his folder and pulled out a different set of documents, placing them in front of Whitmore. But tell me, if you're such a competent manager, why has this store's sales been underperforming for the past 3 weeks? Why is customer retention dropping? Anna stiffened. She knew Nathan was lying, twisting numbers. But the truth was, Bright Mart had been struggling recently, not because of her leadership, but because of the mess Mark had left behind. Still, Nathan knew exactly how to use it against her. Whitmore frowned, flipping through the papers. This is concerning, he admitted. Anna, what's your response? Nathan shot her a smirk, his confidence returning. He wasn't trying to prove himself innocent anymore, he was shifting the blame. Anna took a slow breath, forcing herself to think clearly. Nathan had played every dirty trick he could to get rid of her. If she didn't land a decisive blow right now, she would lose. She opened her mouth to speak, and the door to the conference room swung open. All heads turned as Richard Sterling stepped inside. The CEO of Bright Mart. The man who had given her this job. He adjusted his suit, his expression unreadable as his gaze settled first on Whitmore, then on Nathan, and finally on Anna. Looks like I arrived just in time, he said smoothly. Let's get to the bottom of this, shall we? Nathan's smirk vanished. Anna finally felt the tide begin to turn. The tension in the room thickened the moment CEO Richard Sterling took his seat at the head of the table. His sharp gaze scanned the room, pausing briefly on each face before settling on Nathan. His voice was calm, measured, but there was no mistaking the authority behind it. I understand there have been serious management issues at this location, he said. I want to know exactly who is responsible. Nathan sat up straighter, his fingers grazing the folder in front of him. He had prepared for this. He had anticipated scrutiny, and he wasn't about to go down without a fight. Sir, I completely agree that accountability is necessary, he said smoothly. That's why I've compiled data on the store's recent performance. He slid the folder across the table. Since Anna took over, sales have declined, and customer retention has weakened. While she may have good intentions, her lack of experience has clearly affected operations. A few employees exchanged uneasy glances. Some nodded, the weight of uncertainty pushing them toward the side that felt safest. Anna clenched her fists under the table. Nathan was doing exactly what she expected, redirecting the conversation, shifting the blame. But she had come prepared too. She reached into her bag, pulled out the small USB drive Sarah had given her, and inserted it into the laptop connected to the conference screen. A moment later, a series of documents flashed onto the screen: emails, system logs, and security reports. Anna turned to face the room. I agree that a manager needs to be capable, she said, voice steady, but more importantly, a manager needs to be honest. She clicked to the first document, an email chain between Mark and Nathan, detailing how they plan to manipulate inventory records and create artificial losses. The next document was a security log, showing that an internal account connected to Nathan had been used to alter the inventory system just days before the reported losses. Finally, a signed statement from Sarah appeared on the screen, confirming that Nathan had falsified reports to frame Anna. A heavy silence filled the room. Nathan let out a forced chuckle. Anyone can fake an email, he said, shaking his head. You expect us to believe this over hard financial data? Richard Sterling turned to the IT team at the end of the table. Can these records be verified? Kevin, who had been quiet until now, nodded. Yes, sir. These were pulled directly from the company's secure servers. The access logs confirm that Nathan was behind the changes. A murmur rippled through the room. Richard Sterling leaned back in his chair, eyes locked on Nathan. It seems you've been quite busy, he said, voice devoid of any warmth. Nathan's posture stiffened. Sir, Richard raised a hand, cutting him off. Bright Mart does not tolerate fraud. Nor do we tolerate managers who put their personal ambitions above the integrity of this company. He pushed his chair back and stood. Thank you for making this clear, Nathan, he said, but I believe your time with Bright Mart has come to an end. Nathan's face paled, his fingers curled into fists on the table. He opened his mouth, perhaps to protest, perhaps to bargain, but nothing came out. He knew it was over. Anna exhaled, the tension in her shoulders finally easing. For the first time since this battle began, she knew she had won. The room remained eerily silent as Richard Sterling reached for his pen. With a deliberate motion, he signed the termination order lying before him. "It's official," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "Nathan, you are no longer employed at Bright Mart." A murmur spread across the conference room. Some employees exchanged glances, while others, those who had suffered under Nathan's manipulations, let out quiet sighs of relief. Nathan, however, remained motionless for a moment, as if his brain refused to process what had just happened. Then, his expression twisted into one of pure fury. "This is a mistake," he snapped, shoving his chair back so forcefully that it scraped against the floor. "You think this store can function without me? You think he gestured wildly at Anna, can keep it running?" He snatched the termination document from the table, glanced at it as if expecting to find an escape clause, then slammed it back down. "You'll regret this," he hissed, "all of you." But as he turned to storm out, no one stopped him, no one spoke up in his defense. Nathan had burned too many bridges, and now he was walking away with nothing. Outside the conference room, security was already waiting. A guard escorted Nathan toward the exit, ensuring he didn't have the chance to cause any more trouble. Meanwhile, Richard Sterling turned his attention to the remaining issue, Mark. After reviewing internal audits, he announced, "We've uncovered additional misconduct tied to Mark." Whispers spread through the room. It seems he had been accepting bribes from suppliers in exchange for manipulating store numbers. Richard continued, "This goes beyond simple mismanagement. An official investigation is already underway." Anna watched as some of the employees shifted uncomfortably, likely wondering how deep the corruption had gone. Sterling's expression darkened. "Let me be clear. We will not tolerate fraud at any level of this company." After the meeting concluded, Richard approached Anna. "You fought hard for this store," he said, his tone softer now, "not just for yourself, but for the people here. That's the kind of leadership we need." Anna nodded, still processing everything that had unfolded. "You've earned this position," Richard continued. "I'd like you to stay on as the permanent store manager." Anna exhaled slowly, the weight of the past few weeks finally lifting off her shoulders. "I'd be honored," she said, for the first time in what felt like forever. She knew she had made the right choice in staying. As she stepped out of Richard's office later that evening, her phone buzzed. A voice, low and unfamiliar, came through the line. "You think it's over?" the person said. This was just the beginning. Anna's heart skipped a beat. She opened her mouth to respond, but the line went dead. She stared at her phone, a chill running down her spine. Something told her that this battle wasn't over yet. Anna stared at her phone, the screen still glowing from the recent call. The voice on the other end had been smooth, deliberate, carrying an unmistakable undercurrent of threat. "You think this is over?" the man had said. "You've barely scratched the surface." And then, just like that, the line had gone dead. Anna tightened her grip on the phone. Every instinct told her that this wasn't just an idle threat. Whoever was behind that voice, they knew something she didn't. She exhaled slowly, pushing down the unease creeping up her spine. She needed answers. That afternoon, Kevin, the IT specialist, approached her with an unusually tense expression. "I found something," he said, voice low. Nathan accessed the system one last time before he got fired. Anna's heart skipped a beat. "What did he do?" Kevin handed her a printed log. "He transferred financial records and customer data to an external email. I tried tracing it, but it's encrypted. Whatever he was sending, it wasn't small." Anna scanned the document. Sales figures, vendor contracts, shipment logs. It was all sensitive information. Information that, in the wrong hands, could be used to manipulate the company. Nathan had never been the mastermind. So who was pulling the strings? Anna wasted no time reporting the discovery to Richard Sterling. The CEO listened carefully, his usual composed expression darkening as she spoke. "We assumed Nathan was acting on his own," Anna concluded, placing the documents on his desk. "But someone else was feeding him orders." Richard tapped his fingers against the polished wood of his desk. "If someone went to this much trouble to steal corporate data," he said, "it means they're planning something bigger." He exhaled sharply, then met Anna's gaze. "I'll authorize an internal investigation. But be careful, Anna. Something in his tone made her pause. This isn't just about Nathan anymore. He continued. You've made enemies, ones who don't play by the rules. That night, as Anna left Brightmart's headquarters, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She stepped into the cool evening air, pulling her coat tighter around her. Across the street, a sleek black car sat idling. Behind the tinted windows, she caught the faintest glimpse of a man wearing dark sunglasses. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't reading. He was watching her. A slow dread curled in her stomach. And then, as if sensing her stare, the car's engine rumbled to life. Before she could take a step forward, the tires screeched against the pavement, and the vehicle vanished into the night. Anna stood frozen for a long moment, her breath shallow. Whoever had made that call wasn't bluffing. Something bigger was coming. Brightmart had begun to settle into a rhythm under Anna's leadership. The tension that once clouded the store had started to lift, replaced by a renewed sense of teamwork and purpose. Employees who had once questioned her ability now worked alongside her with growing trust. The hostility that Nathan had fueled had all but disappeared. One afternoon, Richard Sterling visited the store in person. He watched the operations unfold with quiet approval before finally calling Anna into the office. "You've done well," he said, standing near the window, looking out at the store floor. "Most people in your position would have walked away. But you didn't, and that's why Brightmart needs you." Anna listened, waiting for what came next. "I want you to stay on permanently as store manager," he continued. "This place needs someone who doesn't just care about numbers but about people. And I believe you're that person." A part of her still wasn't sure she was ready. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of battles she never expected to fight. But she had stood her ground. And despite everything, she had won. "Thank you," she said. "I won't let you down." Richard nodded. Then his expression grew more serious. "But there's something else," he said. "Our internal investigation turned up something concerning." Anna frowned. "What do you mean?" Richard slid a folder across the desk. "Before he was fired, Nathan transferred company data to an outside source," he said. "At first, we thought it was just an act of revenge. But the recipient was a major competitor." Anna's stomach tightened as she scanned the report. "He wasn't just trying to sabotage Brightmart," she murmured. "He was feeding information to someone else." Richard nodded. "This isn't over," he said. "There's something bigger at play here. I don't know who else is involved. But if they went this far to manipulate our store, there's no telling what their next move will be." Anna exhaled slowly, processing what this meant. She had fought so hard to take control of the store, only to realize that the real battle wasn't over. That night, as she arrived home, a small envelope was waiting on her doorstep. There was no name, no return address. Her pulse quickened as she picked it up. Inside was a single USB drive and a folded note. "If you want the truth, keep digging, but be warned. Not everyone wants you to survive long enough to find it." Anna stared at the note, her fingers tightening around the paper. She had a choice. She could walk away now, keep her store running, and pretend this was over. Or she could plug in the USB and open the next door to a fight she wasn't sure she was ready for. The answer was already forming in her mind. She was never one to walk away. And just like that, a simple act of kindness changed everything. This story reminds us that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but integrity and compassion will always find a way to shine through. So, what would you have done in Anna's place? Let us know in the comments. And if you love uncovering hidden truths, don't forget to subscribe to Undercover Truths for more incredible stories like this one.